Good afternoon, Sanbonani, Dumelang, Molweni. Khoye and, right? I got it right? Khoye and. All right, today is our very first VC open lecture since the new Vice-Chancellor took office 100 days ago. So we have invited my very good friend, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, to present of UJ. Did I say University of Johannesburg? Johannesburg, what did I say? Okay, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, UJ. Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. You see, I practiced a lot to say University of Cape Town. It's the first time, actually, I have to introduce someone from a Vice-Chancellor from another university. So I've been practicing a lot to say I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. So we've invited Professor Tshilidzi Marwala to present on what I believe is a very important topic for the future of this country, the fourth industrial revolution and society. Professor Marwala is, of course, my senior in this VC thing. He has been in office as Vice-Chancellor of UJ for 281 days now. So he's 181 days ahead of me. So he's been giving me notes on how to do this thing. He just said, of course, admitted that he doesn't have a VC's public lecture and he's going to organize it as soon as he gets back to Joburg. So when you see it, know that we influenced him. But before I tell you a bit about Professor Marwala and his many accomplishments, let me share with you why we as UCT organize these lectures. The Vice-Chancellor's Open Lecture Series was established to allow the greater community, not only those within UCT, to attend lectures by respected academics, researchers, and innovators who have distinguished themselves in their areas of expertise. It is our hope that these lectures will offer us a new way to appreciate the world in which we live and inspire us to greatness. But if we were to name individuals who qualify to be invited for public lectures, that is, individuals who have achieved greatness, and let's just say in our country, Professor Marwala will definitely be on the list. Before his appointment as VC of UJ, he served as Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Internationalization and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment at the same institution. Professor Marwala, of course, started his life in a rural village in Venda. Never one to let circumstances define him, he juggled schooling with heading livestock for his family as a young man. But that did not affect his studies. He was determined to succeed. One of Professor Marwala's first great achievements was winning the National Youth Science Olympiad in 1989, while in matric at Mbilwi Secondary School in the town of Sibasa, Limpopo, Venda. He's got Venda powers, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not from Limpopo, you won't understand this, but very important powers to have. That opportunity gave him an opportunity to attend the London International Youth Science Fortnight in the United Kingdom. Before he decided to leave South Africa to study engineering, he actually came to UCT. He describes himself as a UCT dropout. But let me explain what happened. So he won the Science Olympiad in 1989, and in 1990, he spent a year doing A-levels in Johannesburg. In 1991, he came to UCT. He did his first semester in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment. And he wrote his first semester exams and got 103% pass for physics. And he thought, this is a bloody waste of time. Oh, if you're doing physics or maths, you know that there's this tendency of giving more marks than 100. And so you can get 100. So he got 103 marks and he thought it's a waste of time. And so he was awarded a scholarship by the Educational Opportunities Council to study mechanical engineering at Case Western Reserve University in Ohio, in the US, where he graduated magna cum laude in his class. And talk about greatness, that's what it is. I guess that's what UCT dropouts do. After a stint At the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, as a project engineer, Professor Marwala completed a Master's of Mechanical Engineering degree at the University of Pretoria, and then a Doctor of Philosophy in Engineering at the University of Cambridge. He went on to become a postdoctoral research associate at the University of London's Imperial College of Science, Technology and Medicine, where his work revolved around intelligence software. Professor Marwala, before entering academia at the University of the Witwatersrand, sold beer at the SAB. He was actually the executive assistant to the CEO of South African breweries. That's where, I think Vets found you there. Was it UP found you? Vets dug him out of the SAB and they thought it's a waste to get someone like him selling beer at the SAB. He joined academia as an associate professor in 2003 at the University of the Witwatersrand, where he rose up the ranks quickly. And in 2007, he was appointed the Saatchi Chair of Systems Engineering. His accolades seem endless. But seeing as we are talking about greatness, I will share a few. He's a B-rated scientist and a recipient of the Case Western University Alumni Professional Achievement Award. He was a judge of the YouTube Google Space Lab competition in 2011 and an awardee of the NRF Champion of Research Capacity Development Award in 2015. He's also a recipient of the Order of Mapungubwe in bronze, awarded by the President of South Africa in 2004 for developing a new artificial intelligence machine that could change the way we treat diseases. With the fourth industrial revolution upon us, understanding artificial intelligence and how it affects us is paramount to utilizing it for the benefit of all. Right now, we are seeing technology advance at rates we never thought possible a decade ago. We have cars, driverless cars, virtual currencies such as Bitcoin, face recognition to open our smartphones, and many more innovations that make our lives easier. Ladies and gentlemen, we are fortunate today to be able to have Professor Marwala here to address us on this very first open lecture. When I explained to him how this lecture will work, I said to him, he's going to speak, no questions asked, and that's what we do with authorities. And so Professor Marwala has got an hour to talk to us about the fourth industrial revolution in society. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Molweni. Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation, Professor Pakeng, to come and speak about a subject that I am actually quite passionate about, the fourth industrial revolution and its impact on society. One of the things that I used to do, as Professor Pakeng has indicated, I used to brew beer, mkomboti. And then I saw the light. And of course, brewing people is a much better career than brewing beer. So I came to academia. So I am going to be aiming for you to understand what this fourth industrial revolution is and what are some of the technologies that drive the fourth industrial revolution and how we can benefit from it. Now, I will also talk about how this a specific technology of the fourth industrial revolution called artificial intelligence, how it is impacting on economics, how it is impacting on politics, how it is impacting on psychology, the medical sciences, and engineering. Now, before I talk about the fourth industrial revolution, it is perhaps important for me to talk about industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution actually happened in England. Given the population densities of China and India, it should have happened in China or India. For those of you who have spent time in England where it happened, and I was there for 7 years, If you just wander to the pub, you would actually wonder how in the world would the first industrial revolution come out of this place? Now, the reason why it happened there was because there was a scientific revolution that preceded it. The scientific revolution that gave us people like Newton. We know about Newton's laws of motion, his perception of gravitation. He invented the concept of gravitation, even though he did not explain it too well. We know Einstein came and completed that explanation. People like James Watt. So this whole scientific revolution that made us to be able to understand objects and how they move, that ultimately gave us steam engine. And of course, the big symbol of a steam engine is a steam train. The first steam train came to South Africa 60 years after it was first discovered. 60 years. You will agree with me that no society can afford to be 60 years behind. So we were observers of the first industrial revolution as the African continent, not participants. I have to also add that when I was a student here, I actually used to stay at Smart Hall, and I saw, I think I saw Professor Green here who taught me, and he can correct me if I'm not explaining things well, especially when it comes to the second industrial revolution, because the second industrial revolution came about as a result of the observation of the interplay between a magnet and electricity. Hans Ørsted was the first person to observe that when you have a conductor that is conducting electricity, around it there is a magnetic field. And because of that, people like Faraday actually observed that if you put such a conductor next to a magnet, and you put and you move it, electricity is generated. Of course, we know today that the majority of electricity is generated by moving a conductor next to a magnet. This is how telecom actually generates electricity. They have water and they have coal. They use coal to heat water, which moves a conductor next to a magnet. That is how electricity is generated. And it is not witchcraft. It is scientific thinking. And of course, the reverse of that is that if you have a conductor next to a magnet and you put electricity next to it, it moves. This is how you have what is called an electric motor. And an electric motor revolutionized production. When you go to an assembly line and you see things moving, they are moving because of an electric motor. There is a movie that I watched. Apparently, Queen Victoria used to like ice cream. And during a time, a refrigerator was not yet discovered. So they used to go and import huge blocks of ice from the North Pole so that you could have ice cream. And the reason for that was because a fridge was not yet discovered. The reason why the fridge was not yet discovered was because the electric motor, which is actually quite central to refrigeration, in the compressor was not yet there. So the second industrial revolution gave us electricity and an assembly line. Of course, there are other things that emerged out of this understanding of the interplay between a magnet and electricity. One of it is Einstein's theory of relativity. He was basically trying to reconcile Newton's perception of reality with the principles of magnetism as explained by James Clerk Maxwell. And somebody had actually done this before. Somebody had actually created a correction factor. Lorentz, who is a Dutch physicist, had a correction factor. In fact, Initially, the Einstein theory of relativity, it used to be called Einstein-Lorentz theory of relativity. And for those of you who have studied relativity, you will know that a great deal of it is about Lorentz transformation. So again, we were observers, not participants of the second industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution was about these materials that conduct electricity under certain conditions. They are called semiconductors. And from semiconductors, we got transistors. And because transistors are such efficient switches, then you could be able to exploit digital technology, which we actually are using up to today in our computing. Of course, when you go to the fourth industrial revolution, we have quantum computing. The digital technology is older than a transistor. For those of you who are old enough, you still remember something called a telegram. A telegram used to work by ones and zeros, isn't it? And you had all this army of people who used to look at these ones and zeros, and they will actually be able to tell you what it means. Now, with a transistor, that whole process of decoding ones and zeros can be done much more efficiently. Again, even up to today, South Africa does not have a homegrown semiconductor industry. So we are still spectators of the third industrial revolution. Now we are living in an era called the fourth industrial revolution. And it is being driven by quite a number of technologies in biotechnology, in artificial intelligence. So basically, the fourth industrial revolution is going to merge the physical to the biological and to the digital. And it is going to absolutely automate everything around us. And we're going to learn more about this. So what are some of the technologies that are driving the fourth industrial revolution? On the cyber side, we know about artificial intelligence. I will talk about what it is a little bit later. Internet of Things. The blockchain technology is very, very key to this. And the emergence of quantum computing is actually at the heart of the fourth industrial revolution. On the physical side, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, robotics, new materials, for example, graphene, which is much, much stronger than the materials that we are used to. On the biological side, biotechnology. For the first time, we will be able to edit genes of people. Gene editing is becoming a reality. The confluence of the cyber, physical, and biological is going to drive the fourth industrial revolution. Now, I'm going to concentrate on artificial intelligence. Now, what is really artificial intelligence? Professor Green, I think you were the first person to introduce artificial intelligence. That was 27 years ago. Artificial intelligence is really a computational technique of bringing intelligence to machines. Of course, there is a Turing test which says that an artificial intelligent system is a system where when you interact with it, you don't know whether you are interacting with a human being or a machine. I believe that we have not reached a point where we are building machines that can be able to deceive us continuously. So there are various types of artificial intelligence, and I will talk more about it, but one of it is soft computing. Computational intelligence is another one. Machine learning is another one, and inside it we have deep learning. So big data is the use of these technologies in artificial intelligence to analyze large amounts of data. In case you want to know more about this, there is a book, Handbook of Machine Learning. It's a very good book. I wrote it, so please go to Amazon and buy it. Now, what is soft computing? Soft computing is really a technology which is able to bring precision on things that are not precise. Human beings are not precise beings. When you drive, you would not be able to even tell me what is the distance between your car and the car next to you. But you are still able to drive without that very crucial information. If we were designing a robot, we probably would like to know exactly what the distance between the car is to the car next to it. So you have technologies such as fuzzy logic, multi-agent system, and then obviously you can be able to integrate it with things like mechanism design to design intelligent software. This is the work that I did with my then master student, Evan Hewitz, where we were designing multi-agent systems that are intelligent, that are adaptive, and that evolve. And they were able to interact with other agents. And what was actually quite interesting about this work is that we were able to observe that these agents are actually able to bluff without being told to bluff. Which basically means to us that bluffing is actually a natural technique to maximize utility. It's a utilitarian concept. You are bluffing so that you can maximize utility. Of course, from this issue of bluffing and the observation of how bluffing works, you can be able to actually start doing things like detection of people bluffing, which is actually quite crucial for insurance companies. When somebody presents themselves and say, yes, I did drive into a wall, but I can assure you I was not drunk. Then you can be able to detect that, And I'm not bluffing, by the way. The other type of artificial intelligence is what is called computational intelligence. You look at nature and its complexity, and then you are able to build algorithms that are able to do complex tasks. And one of these in artificial intelligence, there are many. Genetic algorithm is one of them. Simulated annealing is another. But today I'm going to pay special attention to something called ant colony optimization. So here on the left-hand side is a picture that I took in Polokwane, very close to where I come from. That is an ant hill. That ant hill is built by these ants that are on my hand. In case you are wondering why these ants are on my hand, we actually eat them in Limpopo. I know it is not kosher, but they are very, very delicious. Now, the beauty about these ants is that they're able to build such complicated structure. And what you are seeing on the surface is just what is on the surface. If you go down, it's even more beautiful. There is a YouTube video which I think this is actually cruel, where somebody actually went and melted aluminium and dip it into this thing and then allow it to cool. And you probably have seen this thing, and was able to see the complex things underneath. Of course, he had to kill this ants. He claims that the ant hill was already dead, but nonetheless, what you observe is actually quite spectacular. So from this, we have something called ant colony optimization. It turns out that the intelligence of the ants actually was first observed in South Africa. There is an Afrikaans poet called Eugene Marais. He wrote a very beautiful book in 1928 called Die Ziel van die Mier, which is basically talking about the sort of intelligence that you see here. Unfortunately, he published this in a series of articles on the magazine called Huisgenoot. And the Dutch Nobel laureate obviously who could understand Afrikaans actually read this thing and reproduced it as his own. It was controversial obviously, because he was found out that he copied it from Eugene Marais, but he was a Nobel Prize winner. So from this, we are able to build something called ant colony optimization. Ant colony optimization is one of those algorithms that are actually able to solve a complex problem called the traveling salesman problem, where you have 50 cities around the United States, and the task is to find the shortest distance to visit all the 50 cities. So the ant colony optimization is able to use this. In electronic maps, when you want to move from one point to another, you are able to use ant colony optimization to find such optimal task. Now, the next type of artificial intelligence is what we call machine learning. In my own views, machine learning is statistical approach to making machines intelligent. So one example of machine learning is what we call a neural network. It is inspired by the biological neurons. For those of us who thought coming to engineering were escaping biology, it followed me, you know. So you have a neuron, and from the working of these neurons, you are able to design. This is just one example. You have many types of machine learning, but this is a neural network. It has an input and it has an output. So this is a mathematical explanation of what is happening. And what happens if you have an input here and an output here, and you are able to train this, you are able to make a prediction. So for example, if the input is somebody's face and the output is who he is, we will call that a face recognition algorithm. So this is really what a neural network is all about. Now, if a neural network is big, like the one that Facebook uses in order to allow you, whenever you post pictures, to be able to tell who this person is and label quite directly. They use a much bigger neural network. So it becomes a deep neural network because unlike the previous one, which just has one layer, and we call this a shallow neural network, it has multiple layers. And because it has multiple layers, it is able to do a mathematical concept called convolution. I'm not going to explain exactly what convolution is all about, but the result of that is that it's able to do very, very complex tasks. Again, if you want to know a little bit more about machine learning, there is a book that you can get on Amazon, and it is a good book because I'm the co-author of the book. So this is a robot from a university in Korea called the Korean Institute of Advanced Science and Technology. So you have this robot that was driving a car. You see, where I come from, if you are there and I meet my chief, I have to kneel. So if I take this robot to my village, it will be able to respect my chief, and it will not be disrespectful. It can, look at what it is able to do. It is able to open doors, drive cars, open doors, and it is even able to do a little bit of engineering work. These are tasks that are normally done by a human being. And now these tasks are being done by a robot. Of course, this is going to have all sorts of implications in the world of work, which I'm going to cover a little bit later. But, so this robot can learn, it can sense, it can react, it can drive, it can walk, but there are many other things that it will not be able to do. It is obviously almost human, and because it is almost human, it is artificially intelligent. But does it fall in love? It does not fall in love. Is it conscious? If you put it in a factory, will Zwelinzi Mavavi be able to recruit it? Not to join COSATU, but to join the new union. Can it respond to the famous call of Marx, people of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Robots of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. It turns out that this robot can work 24 hours. You can basically work it to death, and you will not have human rights issues on your hands. Now, this artificial intelligence is changing the world of economics, and it has all sorts of implications on who are the new bankers of the fourth industrial revolution. So it is changing the practice of economics as well as the thinking of economics. Now, the practice of economics, for example, when you go to the bank and you are looking for a loan to buy that car, so there will be something called credit scoring that is done in the background. They will ask you how much do you earn, who is your employer, and so on and so forth, and they probably will go and do a credit check on you, and then they will give you a credit score, which will determine the interest rate that you're going to get. In fact, it will be used to decide whether you are going to get a credit or not. So it is changing the practice of economics. Whether it is financial forecasting, whether it is pricing of options and derivatives, whether it is credit scoring, it is changing that. We did write a book on this, on how artificial intelligence can be used to model economics. But it is also changing economic thinking. The principles of demand and supply, when you go to buy things on Amazon, are actually different. For those of you who have been to Southeast Asia, you know very well that if you go to the market, you get the price you deserve. If you are a sharp negotiator, you will get a good price. If you are a lousy negotiator, you will get a bad price. The reason is because the person on the other side identifies your demand curve. And where the demand meets the supply, that is the price. If you are a sharp negotiator, the price is going to be down. If you are lousy, it is going to be up. It seems that thing that we used to see in flea markets is now migrating to the electronic age. Me and a friend of mine in Brazil went to Amazon to buy the same book, and it was sold to us at different prices because our demand curves are actually changing. So this whole thing is changing that theory of demand and supply to individualized pricing, unlike going to pick and pay where you get the price from aggregate demand and aggregate supply. The theory of rational expectations, rational choice, decisions are becoming more rational when we use machines. Herbert Simon came up with the idea of bounded rationality. He won a Nobel Prize in 1978. He also won a Turing Award. He's one of the founders of artificial intelligence. And bounded rationality basically means that human beings are fundamentally not rational. In fact, you can ask them to do the same thing. Depending on whether you ask them in the morning or in the afternoon, they change their minds. And there is a whole field of economics called behavioral economics. That is economics that is based on the behavior of people. All that is changing because decisions are being made by artificial intelligent machines. Game theory, we all have watched that movie called The Beautiful Mind. Of course, if you have a two-player game and it interacts with rules, then you get what is called a Nash equilibrium. What has happened is that in game theory, if you have multiple players, you couldn't quite do the maths. So what you do, you will reduce it. You use reducive techniques in order to approximate that Nash equilibrium ultimately as a two-player game. Again, now with the advances of artificial intelligence, especially multi-agent systems, you are able to do a huge, a multiplayer game of big dimensions, and you are able to observe Nash equilibrium. Mechanism design, we actually wrote a book on this, and I wrote it with Evan Hewitt. So mechanism design is a theory that was proposed by Hewitt, not this Hewitt, another Hewitt, the oldest person to win a Nobel Prize. In fact, he never even collected it because he died between announcement and collection. And of course, when we were writing the book, we're not too specific which Hewitts we are talking about here. And I think it had the effect of on the sales, which we actually quite want. The issue of causality becomes very, very key. We have not been able to handle causality. All we do is to infer causality from correlation. Of course, you can be able to, under special conditions, you are able to get causal relations from correlations relations. And you have something called counterfactuals. When you do clinical trials and you administer a piece of medication to someone, what you are really trying to do is to find out what happens if you give somebody that pill and not give him. And you cannot be able to give somebody a pill and not give him at the same time. So we invented clinical trials, the control experiment, so that we can approximate doing things that we have not done to a person. With the advent of artificial intelligence, we're able to approximate these counterfactuals, and therefore this is going to have huge implications on clinical trials going forward. Pricing and portfolio optimization is another work that we have spent a lot of time working on. Markowitz won a Nobel Prize for portfolio optimization, but his theory assumes stationarity. Now, with advances in artificial intelligence, we're able to relax those restrictions, and we're able to come up with a much more dynamic portfolio theory. Again, I urge you to go and buy these two books. You will really learn quite a great deal. There is a theory in economics called information asymmetry. There's a classic paper called The Markets of Lemon that Stiglitz, it was actually written by Acclaimed, but the Nobel Prize was given to Stiglitz, Acclaimed, and Sargent. And they came up with this theory of information asymmetry. And they use two car salesmen. That if you go to the market where you have two car salesmen, one sells good cars, another one sells bad cars. And you as a customer, because of information asymmetry, you do not know which one is which. What is going to happen? And the conclusion they reach is that the good car salesman will actually go out of business. Why? Because he's less likely to give a discount than a bad car salesman. So their conclusion was that information asymmetry actually impairs the markets. Now, what is happening now when all these decisions are migrated to a machine, what happens is that the levels of information asymmetry is reduced. The markets become more efficient, and consequently, the importance of information asymmetry becomes less. This is an example of a course called Networks at Cornell University, where they actually updated their course material to include our theory on information asymmetry. Again, market efficiency is actually changing. I'm old enough to remember the stock market when it was still downtown. For those of you who are young, you used to go to the floor and people will be shouting prices. They will be shouting. It was a match, isn't it? Now, what would happen is that for you to get a job in that scenario, firstly, you had to be tall. I still remember that. Secondly, your voice must be loud. Because if you are short and your voice is soft, you will not be able to make those sales in the floor. Of course, now we know that the stock market has moved to Sandton, and it is very, very quiet. People are much more concerned about being closer to Sandton because that nanosecond of delay will make you miss a sale. So, it's high-frequency trading now. Now, what has happened is because most of stocks now are bought by intelligent machines. And the impact of that is that it is making markets more efficient. And efficient markets means that nobody gains unfairly, and so on and so forth. Now, given all these advancements, I wrote an article. It appeared, it was republished on Sunday, or on Business Day yesterday. what are the bankers of the future given the central role of technology? Should banks be employing engineers? Should they be employing accountants or economists or social scientists or financial engineers? I understand that in Sweden now you have a course called techno-social scientists. The people who understand society and they understand people and they understand technology. The bankers of the future probably should be a combination of all this. Michael Jordan, who obviously has just founded a new bank called a Zero Bank, we know him from First National Bank, actually thinks, this is his response on Twitter, banks of the future will need more engineers and less economists. I actually think it will need people who have expertise in all that. This is another work that we did on decision-making with incomplete information. The reason why I started doing this work was because about 20 years ago, I went to the bank to look for a home loan so that I can buy a house. And then the bank says, yeah, sharp, you are fine. But you need an insurance to cover the possibility of whatever happens to you, you know. Then I went and applied for this thing, and they say you have to take an HIV test. You still remember when they used to ask you to take an HIV test? So I was quite worried about that. I said, why are they asking me that, you know? It turns out that the reason why they were asking that was because the actuarial models actually did not factor how to basically do individual risk. They actually work on probabilities, populations, and so on and so forth. So we went and created a neural network which will take demographic characteristics and be able to make a prediction. And that prediction is the risk of HIV. And obviously save the insurance companies from asking people to go and ask people to take HIV tests. So we went to the Department of Health. They have something called the antenatal data. So when a woman falls pregnant and she goes to a public hospital, they take all these demographic characteristics. And then they also take an HIV test. So we got this thing and we trained a neural network. It was working very well. Then the question was, but how are you going to handle if the person who presents themselves is not a woman but a man? Because it has things like gravidity, which is the number of pregnancies, and parity, which is the number of children. And you probably would not be able to get that information from a man. So what we did here, we approached it in two ways. One was to devise an algorithm that will be able to predict missing information. And we call this an auto-associative network. It's a neural network that is trained to recall what it has seen. And what happens is that if what it has seen, just seen now, is not complete, and you fill it with wrong information, it is not able to reproduce itself. And you can be able to use optimization to identify the missing parameters such that whenever you present the complete parameters, it is able to reproduce itself. So that was the problem solved. And the second way of doing this was to say, okay, if somebody presents themselves, we probably are going to ask him questions about their partner. And of course, that is also not perfect, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole field of decision-making in artificial intelligence with incomplete information. And this is a problem that the developed world is not too worried about, because they don't really have a problem of missing data. We have huge problems of missing data. Again, if you really want to know more about this, go to Amazon and you are going to find the book that we wrote about it. Now, basically what artificial intelligence is doing is making us make rational decisions. But what I really want to talk about now is what we call causality. Because causality is such a difficult thing. How do you know? How do you rule out that your ability to predict an output whenever you are given an input is not because of correlation, but it is because of causality? It's a big problem. Philosopher Hume spent a great deal of time devising ways of finding out when does correlation becomes causality? And one of the things is that the cause must happen first, and then the effect must happen later. So if there is a time delay, there's probably a probability that there is a causal relationship. But you do have situations where you have delayed correlations, especially if you have what is called confounding variable. So if you have variable A that causes B and variable A also causes C, you probably are going to observe that B and C are correlated. So you are going to mistake correlation with causality if you only just use time as a measure of correlation. At the beginning of the year, we awarded at the University of Johannesburg an honorary doctorate to Professor Engele. He won a Nobel Prize for this theory called co-integration. So co-integration is actually an interesting mathematical concept. So the way it works is that if you are walking with a dog, and that dog is yours, of course the movement of your dog and your movement are both non-stationary. So if you took those signals and subtract one from another, and then you test for stationarity, you have two stationary signals, one from the dog, one from you. If you subtract one from another, and the result becomes stationary, then there is a causal relationship between the two. It's actually quite a beautiful theory if you think about it, you know. Because, of course, stationarity does not mean that the distance between you and the dog is not going to change, but it means that over time the average is going to be the same, because it is your dog. If it is not your dog, it probably will go with its owner. The distance will keep on increasing. Both the signals are non-stationary, but when you subtract one from another, you get a non-stationary. So it's a very interesting thing. So of course, these are just one of the ways in which you can be able to separate correlation from causality. But causality is still one of the biggest problems of our time. Now, how is artificial intelligence changing the field of politics? A few years back, I had an Italian research collaborator called Monica Lagazio, who said, why don't we start using artificial intelligence to predict whether two countries are going to go to war or not? And then I said, but how can you predict such a complex things? And then she looked at me and said, do you think Sweden and Swaziland, Eswatini now, will ever go to war? I said, no. She says, exactly, that is a prediction. So you can be able to predict. So what we did here, there is something called military data that is gathered by the University of Michigan. It looks at 7 variables. Do these two countries share a border? What is the distance between their capitals? What is the difference in the degrees of militarization between them? What is the amount of trade between these two countries? Are they democracies? Both of them, are they democracies, or one is a democracy, or both of them are dictatorship? And so on and so forth. And then, based on that data, you are able to infer whether you can be able to predict whether two countries are going to go to war or not. In fact, it turns out that the political scientists have theories that are about conflict. One of them is the theory of democratic peace. They say democracies never go to war. And statistically, apparently, if you actually go and look at the data, you realize that countries that have genuine democracies don't go to war. It also, another theory that says trading partners never go to war. Of course, you can understand why. Because when you destroy, you're destroying some of your assets, and so on and so forth. So we wrote this thing about militarized conflict modeling using artificial intelligence. The Chinese military actually translated this to Mandarin. And I was very, very worried about how they're going to write my name. So this is how they write my name. So this first character is a horse. Ma is a horse. Of course, Chinese is a tonal language, so you have 4 types of ma. So Ma, Jack Ma, this is Jack Ma's last name, complete. You know. And then Wa is the gutter of a roof. You can almost see a roof here, isn't it? And the gutter. Water falling through this. So this is a gutter of a roof. And whenever you see this character in Chinese, it's almost a verb. It's a person about to do something. And this is a carriage. Combined together is called La. It means to pull. So I am a puller of horses from the gutter of roofs. But artificial intelligence is also changing the psychology of people. We're hearing that many young Americans are becoming very rude because they are used to commanding these devices, Siri or whatever you call them, you know. So another frontier of work is how do we study this psychology, the changing psychology of people as a result of their interactions with a machine. This is the work that I did with Bo Xing from China. What is the impact of intelligent machines on the behavior of people? What is the cognitive developments that are going to come as a result of the 4th Industrial Revolution? One of our social scientists, Professor Grace Kuno, wrote an article on the newspaper, what is the impact of the 4th Industrial Revolution on absent fathers? I very often find that when I am away, I actually speak more to my children and to my wife than when I'm with them. Because when I am speaking to them through some device, I have to look at the device. In fact, I even sometimes have to hold the device, which is an active effort. And as a result, I can't be distracted. I can't do the sort of things that I do when I'm at home, where I will be talking to my son while at the same time reading an email on my phone. So she came to the conclusion that the concept of absent fathers is becoming blurred as a result of the use of technology. The relationship between the 4th Industrial Revolution and spending habits, I've already talked about how this is actually changing the field of economics. Again, please go to Amazon and buy this book. This is a medical application that we did quite a number of years ago. So this is an image that comes from what you call an EEG signal. The ECG is the one that they put on your chest. The EEG is the one that they put on the head to see the activities of the brain. So what happens is that after they put it on the head, you get something that looks like this. And then we gave this to doctors and said, please, diagnose these pictures. Then they put, they diagnosed. We took away the information. We hid it for 2 months and went back to the same doctors and we gave them the same information and said, please, label this thing. They labeled it. We observed that half of them changed their minds. Now, if they're changing their minds, it means somebody who had epilepsy was told that you are fine. Somebody who did not have it was told that they have it. That is what we call misdiagnosis. We used the same thing and we gave it to an artificial intelligent machine. It was able to classify with 90% accuracy, and it never changed its mind. In fact, this whole field of radiology, there was a cover article on The Economist, will become obsolete simply because machines are doing this job of reading medical images much better than human beings. Another example of what machines can do is the work that we did quite a number of years ago This is when somebody loses their voice boxes. Normally it is because of cancer and their voice box has been surgically removed. So they can still move their tongue, but the voice just does not come out. So the device that we designed was this thing. You put it in the mouth, and based on the movement of your tongue, you can be able to get a signal. And based on the signal, you can be able to recreate their voice. Of course, there are exceptions, especially with words like "o," where the tongue is not touching the palate, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, it works quite well. So this was an article on MIT Technology Review just talking about this invention. We actually have a US patent on this. This is another medical application to detect pulmonary embolism. Again, you use artificial intelligence to be able to do this. I did this with Simon Scarrell, who was my PhD student. And again, this thing works better than human beings. This is a picture of a bridge in Sandton. This bridge collapsed. It killed somebody. Now, the question we were asking was that, could we have prevented this? My first engineering teacher, Professor Green, I hate to disappoint you, was not you, but it was my grandmother who could not read or write. So my grandmother used to make clay pots. So she will go to the river to collect clay. In engineering, we call that material selection. Then she will come back with clay, and then she will form this pot. Of course, it involves three-dimensional visualization. And after she does this, she will not take it to the oven and bake it because it will crack, isn't it? She will put it in the sun. And after it is dry, she will take it to the oven and she will bake it. After she does that, she will not rush to cool it with cold water because it will crack. She will cool it very, very slowly. And that is what we call annealing in physics. Boltzmann even has an equation to describe this. For those of you who do not know, Boltzmann was a German physicist. It's called the Boltzmann equation. She knew that you could not cool it quickly without even knowing who Boltzmann was, let alone the Boltzmann equation. And then she will go and knock each one of these pots. And based on the ringing, if it rings for a long time, it's a good pot. If it rings for a short time, it's a bad pot. For those of you who are mechanical engineers, you will know that if it rings for a long time, it is damped. If it rings for, it is undamped, or the damping is very small. If it rings for a short time, it's damped. So you have a damping factor. She knew that without even knowing what a damping factor is. She did not even know that dynamic equation with the damping. She was not worried about that. But what worried me about my grandmother, because she was a businesswoman, she was making these pots to sell them, was that as she was growing older, she was throwing good pots because her hearing was deteriorating. So this is ultimately what I did a PhD on. Can we be able to use artificial intelligence to be able to predict the integrity of structures? The same thing actually happens. This technology is used to monitor the conditions of structures. That sound that you used to listen to, we call it vibration data. We do sophisticated things like model analysis. And we take that sound into a machine learning algorithm, and it is able to tell you whether the structure is good or it is bad. Fantastic, you know. So we're able to take that technology that my grandmother taught me to the fourth industrial age. Of course, you can go to Amazon to get more details about this. I mean, this is another work that we did. You have this thing called finite element analysis. You can be able to use variational approach to formulate this, or Galeckin approach to formulate this. But what happens to this finite element? This is a finite element of a car. This is a finite element of a bone structure. This is a finite element which is very useful for the dentist. So you're able to do this. And what we have found is that these finite elements are not very accurate. Their predictions are not as accurate as what they're supposed to do. So our work here was to develop a technique where we make finite element methods better predict the observation. It's called finite element updating procedure. Again, you are able to use computational intelligence, so we spent a lot of time using computational intelligence to do that. Or you can even use Bayesian statistics to do the same thing. And obviously, the impact of this is quite huge economically. Now that we are in the Cape, this is the recent work that we have done. How do you monitor the depth of dams using cameras? That's really what we are doing here. You put cameras and you are able to monitor this. We have an app where you can be able to see what is happening and so on and so forth. But I have talked to you about what good things that artificial intelligence is doing. But there are other bad things that this artificial intelligence is doing. I was in Asia, in China to be specific. So you go to this place and then they have this machine, you put your passport, and then it looks at your picture, and it is obviously seeing you on the camera, and it validates that this person on the picture is the same person that I am seeing now. So I arrived there. Doesn't work for me. I was with a friend of mine called Peter Vale. Peter Vale arrives. Sharp, sharp. It allows him to pass. I arrive. It doesn't allow me to pass. And I was with my student, Mzukisi. Mzukisi, the same thing. And then I was also with my other student, John. John's first language is English, by the way. Everything is fine. Then I realized that this thing is discriminating against Africans. It turns out that most of the facial recognition algorithms were designed with a database that was largely gathered in North America and Asia. And as a result, if you are from the African continent, especially from Limpopo, where I come from, you know what I'm talking about. It does not work. The other thing was that with Mashaba, God save his soul, he just died. We did something where you can speak to it in Sepedi and it translates into English. Everything was good. Then we tested it on Xhosa. That was when our problems started. Every click was classified as noise. And Professor Green, you know the windows that you do to signal processing, it was actually throwing this thing away as clicks. We were quite worried. Why? And the reason is actually linguistic. Xhosa is probably one of the languages which is a mixture of two languages that are completely different. A Bantu language and Khoisan. Secondly, Xhosa is not a clicking language. It's only 5% clicks. So when you see a signal, it's like this for 5 minutes, then a click. And so on and so forth. So the clicks are not happening often enough for the computer to be able to learn. We can't afford such a language to be closed out of the technology of the fourth industrial revolution. My deputy vice-chancellor bought me the Google Assist. So I went to it and say, hey, Google, who is Tshilidzi Marwala? Say, sorry, I don't know. So, hey, Google, who is John Kennedy? John Kennedy was the president of the United States. I said, I'm going to trick this thing. Hey, Google, who is the author of Skynet in the Market? Tshilidzi Marwala with an American accent. We all know what happens to Google Maps, isn't it? You know, how they pronounce African street names. Again, is the issue of the database that is used to train these things. So this fourth industrial revolution is going to change our regulations. The Uber car killed someone. All I want to know is who is responsible for that. You know that self-driving car that killed someone in an old woman? Who is responsible for that? Is it the engineer? All these things require a new paradigm into ethics and regulations. And this is an example of the work that we just completed with our PhD student, Dr. Mabuza, and I co-supervised this with Professor Nero Mondo, where we were developing algorithms to be able to understand African people. For example, here we were looking at the iris recognition. It turns out that the contrast between the people and the iris is less sharp for people of African descent than people of European descent. How do you develop algorithms that are able to do this so that you can include people who are otherwise not included? Now, what are the consequences of the fourth industrial revolution? The world of work is actually shrinking. When I was brewing beer at South African breweries, there used to be a brewery in Port Elizabeth, Ebai. It used to employ 3,000 people. 20 years ago, it was automated. It can be operated by 50 people. The irony of it all is that it now produces more alcohol than when it was employing 3,000 people. So the world of work is actually changing, and what we are entering is what is called the post-work era, where factories are going to be smaller. And we need to think about that. Trade unions were invented to fight exploitation, isn't it? But the fourth industrial revolution is going to throw at us human irrelevance. How are we going to deal with human irrelevance? Inequality is going to skyrocket, and people are confused. I was reading about taxing robots being proposed by Bill Gates out of all the people. The question is, what is a robot? I don't know. Because your Microsoft Word is part robot. Because when you spell things wrongly, it can automatically correct. Something that you would have to normally employ people 30 years ago to look at your spellings. So you can't really tax robots. And people are talking about the universal basic income. How will you be able to do universal basic income if evidence are saying that the fourth industrial revolution is going to reduce tax collection? The Laffer curve is an economic concept, actually explains all these things. Bounded freedom. There's this story about selling of land for mirrors. Today, people are selling all their personal data for the Gmail account or for the Twitter account. The consequence of that is that wherever you are being watched. There might not be footsteps behind you with somebody wearing dark glasses, but nonetheless, it's the same thing. Nationalism is being challenged. Bounded nationalism, bounded democracy. We know about the Cambridge Analytica and the impact on the US elections. Laws and ethics to regulate automation must be discovered. The whole field of economic theory, we'll have to look at new economic theories that take into account the fact that the world is basically becoming the world of machines interacting with human beings. And the new sort of psychology theory must be discovered to understand human-people interaction. And looking forward, we need to produce skills that will be multidisciplinary. When I dropped out of University of Cape Town, I went to Cleveland, Ohio. And when I arrived there, I knew how the UCT curricula looked like. And when I looked at this curricula they gave me, they said I should spend 12 semesters doing humanities and social sciences. Humanities and social sciences. I couldn't quite understand it. And I think, and this morning I was reading the fact that the top 100 companies, 9 of them are from China, 11 are from the United States, none from Europe. And the reason for that is because the Europeans, for example, the Germans, their education is too specialized. For them to imagine a technology that has huge aspect of humans and society, like Facebook and so on and so forth. So as we move forward, we have to give our students multidisciplinary education. So for me, with these 12 courses, I decided to take 2 psychology courses. Then I took 3 acting courses. So the reason you don't see me on Generation or Isibaya is not because of lack of talent, because I actually studied this thing, you know. And then they said, no, you can't just take introductory courses. 6 of them must be in one discipline so that you can develop depth. That is how I actually learned my economics, because I actually ended up taking 7 different economic classes. Thank you very much. Enkos.
Tshilidzi, thank you very much for that instructive and very inspirational lecture, as usual. Very inspirational, but we're not surprised. I mean, if you took acting modules and so on, I thought you would say you also took marketing because you sold us all your books. I mean, somehow you were saying to us, here is the 4th Industrial Revolution and society, and the only way to get into it is to buy my books. Are there any other books written on the subject? Just checking. I told you about the vendor powers. You saw them in action. Colleagues, Professor Marwala has to catch a flight soon. Actually, I was about to tell him his flight is leaving. So we're going to just say thank you to you for making the time to come and present the lecture with us. We know that you're Vice-Chancellor, and so you don't accept big gifts. Otherwise, we had a cow for you. But we didn't want to get you into trouble, you know, so we thought we should give you something rather smaller than a cow. Thank you very much. Colleagues, that was our first open lecture. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll see you next year for our second one. Tshilidzi, thank you very much. Travel safely to Johannesburg.